When women speak poorly about men to their sons, your father's an asshole. Like,
okay.
Men suck, men are no good. And then this instills in the boy, oh, men are no good, so I can't be that. So I need to be something else.
Nic Warner is a transformative coach specializing in men's work and relationships. His journey of healing and exploration led him to advocate for addressing the wounded masculine society.
The question came, have you healed the relationship with your father? I was like, oh, my relationship's great. Like, I don't need to worry about it because I now have a great relationship. And that's when my sister was like, yeah, but what about for the 30 odd years before that? I forgot about it. I repressed it because I didn't want to think about it. So I was getting into men's work that kind of gave me the tools to then come to him and say, hey, we need to have a conversation. And then he was ready. He was like primed for it.
Hello and welcome to Kaplankaya on the southwestern Aegean coast of Turkey. We are recording the podcast, the Harvest series, where we interview amazing speakers, practitioners and artists joining the Harvest Summit. I hope you will enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to this podcast, the Harvest Series podcast. We are in Kaplankaya. It's early morning and I am with Nic Warner. He's a transformative coach specializing in men's work and relationships. His journey of healing and exploration led him to advocate for addressing the wounded masculine society, empowering individuals with clarity and connection. Hello, Nic.
Hey, how you doing?
Thank you very well. It's early in the morning. We'll try to make this work. How are you?
I am slightly jet lagged, but other than that, fantastic.
You've been traveling a lot between US and Europe to give men's retreats.
Exactly.
How did they go?
Really, really well. The first one, there was about 47 men that came to Austin from all around the world. Somebody came for Australia for the weekend.
Wow.
Which is really, it's a really beautiful indication of how powerful this work is. And we had some of our old teachers come and they're kind of masters in this work and they've been doing this for decades. And it was a really powerful, really transformative, really beautiful experience.
So please explain me about this men's retreat. Obviously, I'm not invited. What's happening there? Why do people come?
It's a very common question from women. What happens at a men's retreat?
Yeah. Are you going to share?
I'll share some. We basically create a space for men to inspire them to remove the masks of who they believe they need to be and the masks that they've put on throughout life. Perhaps from societal conditioning or cultural conditioning, they are convinced to be somebody that they're not. So we create a space where they get to take that mask off. And they get to experience life from a truly authentic place. And they get to see other men that are doing the same, which then inspires them to go even deeper. And it's truly transformational. I've never met a man that came that said, oh, I wish I didn't do that.
Really? Okay. So what kind of transformation do you notice?
There's one example that I can think of just off the top of my head. There was a man that came, his life was great. He was a very successful businessman. He'd been married with a couple of kids for maybe 20 years. He was a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He had all of these things. However, his marriage was a disaster. And his partner said to him, you know, everything you try to accomplish, you succeed at, but our relationship sucks. Our marriage is terrible, and I need you to try. And he did, but he didn't know what he was trying at. He didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to change. He didn't know what she needed and what the marriage needed. So he came to us, and he was, the very first day, you could see the way he was sitting, the way he was kind of judging the situation. He was very uncomfortable. He didn't really want to be there. And by the end of it, he came up to me and he said, I know exactly what it is I need to do. And I know what she needs and I know what she wants. And now I can succeed because I've actually been shown an example and a way forward that is going to make the relationship successful.
And could you share with me what he was looking for?
Yeah, so if you look at, the clearest indication is you've heard of toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
it's this,
I've heard and seen.
It does more harm than good, in my opinion, because masculinity isn't toxic. Yeah. It's an incredibly necessary, beautiful, powerful thing. Just as femininity isn't toxic. And we kind of put it in this basket of, okay, that's toxic masculinity. And then boys grow up thinking, oh, well, if masculinity is toxic, I don't want to be that because that's not safe. And what this does is it creates the opposite shadow. Mm-hmm. So toxic masculinity is just a shadow of humans. And it includes men that are dominating, that are controlling, that are rigid, that are greedy. It's a very extracting energy. The opposite side of that, and maybe you've experienced this as well, is the nice guy. And the nice guy is somebody that he can't set boundaries, he can't ask for what he needs. He gets walked over by his partner, his bosses, his friends, his parents. He's very disconnected from his strength and from his power. Whereas the other man abuses his strength and his power. Yeah. So the nice guy is also very manipulative. So he won't ask you for what he needs, but he'll do things hoping that you'll read his mind.
Okay.
And it's just as unhealthy and it's just as dangerous as the toxic masculinity, but it is a result of people saying, oh, masculinity is toxic and masculinity is this and that and bad. And whereas in the middle, you have the healthy masculine, which is a man that has purpose and he can be present and he has integrity. He does what he says he's going to do. He has an awareness of something greater than himself. So he's in service to something greater than himself. One of the main differences between a boy and a man is a boy is very much about himself. He does everything for himself. So psychologically, you can have men that run companies and that run countries and they're in positions of power, but psychologically they're still stuck in boyhood. Yeah. There was never an initiation into manhood. There was never a rite of passage. So traditional cultures around the age of 13 to 15, or even 12 to 15, a boy would be taken away from community. He would go through an ordeal. He would go through a process where he realizes that he's no longer going to be viewed as the boy that he once was. And then he is initiated back into the community from his elders and from his peers and from his parents and uncles and mentors. And then he is seen and treated as a man. And it is a process, sometimes they have a tooth knocked out or they get put out into nature by themselves for a few days without food and water, or there are many different variations, but it's something that only quote unquote men are able to do and boys cannot. So they go through this initiation, the boy dies, the man is born.
The transformation. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we don't have that anymore. Mm-hmm. So boys grow up, they see other men around them, they see their peers who are also uninitiated. Most of their fathers are uninitiated, so most of the men in society are uninitiated. And that's how they learn to be men. So, maybe if I sleep with more women, or if I make more money, if I get bigger muscles, if I buy more houses, all of these really irrelevant things are what they see as an indication of how to be more masculine.
Yeah, okay.
Rather than a man who can sit and be present and he can breathe and he can energetically become wider than everything in front of him, so he feels like a safe space.
Wow, so the practices is, one of them is breath, I guess?
There's a lot of breath work. There's a lot of different breath. One of the ways that perhaps you've felt yourself subconsciously to lose trust in a man is if his breath is more shallow than yours.
Okay, I haven't noticed.
So most humans breathe in their upper chest.
Yeah.
And if you sit in front of a man, and we're going to do this in one of the workshops this afternoon, and suddenly he starts to breathe deeply into his belly, and everything kind of slows down, energetically you begin to feel safer.
Wow, incredible.
And then in your body you'll notice that you can start to soften. If you're with a man that he's kind of breathing up here and you can feel that he's stuck in his head, he feels unsafe. And it's very, very subtle until you've sat with somebody and experienced a deeper, more depth within that man.
Wow. So do you think the parents, is it more usually the mother or the father example that have an impact on the men that don't have a clue about what is masculine and what they're expected to do in a way?
That's a great question. It's both. It's very much both, because the father needs to be the example of the man. A boy cannot become a man without other men, because he has no guiding light. There is nobody to show him. And children learn through example. They learn by example. So if you have a man that is quote unquote toxic masculine, the boy is either going to see that as the example of men, or he's going to see that what he doesn't want to be. Okay, I don't want to be like dad because dad's abusive and dad's violent and dad's aggressive.
Yeah.
The other side of that, and I've experienced this a lot, is when women speak poorly about men to their sons. Your father's an asshole. Like,
okay.
Your father, men suck, men are no good. And then this instills in the boy, oh, men are no good, so I can't be that. So I need to be something else.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The relationship that the mother has to her father is a very good indication of her relationship to other men. Is she controlling? Does she need to control to feel safe? In which case, that is the example that she's showing to the boy what men should be like, or how men should deal with women. So it's a very... Both the mother and the father have a very strong influence on how the boy will become a man. But typically, boys need men, and they need good men to be around and to experience.
We notice sometimes, I'm going to say horrible things, but that's okay, you can correct me. Are men more selfish and supposed to be more selfish than women?
It depends how you define selfish.
I mean, women, because maybe... I'm experiencing things because they're made to genetically to have babies, are more centered about outside of them, and the men more on them. I don't know, physically.
So I think it's quite nuanced, because so an example the other day, my partner is pregnant.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And I work very hard because I need to provide for the family. And then her complaint was, you don't do anything for the relationship. Behind every complaint, there's an unmet need. And her unmet need is that she's not feeling loved in the way that she needs to in certain times, especially since she's pregnant. Am I being selfish because I'm trying to work towards providing for her so she doesn't have to work? Even though I'm by myself, I'm like grinding away, traveling around, doing retreats, doing these things. For her, it can appear as selfish. Whereas for me, it's in service to her and to my family. So some men are very selfish. And that, as I said, that's the difference between the boy and the man, is a boy is very selfish because it's all about him. Whereas a man is in service to something greater than himself, whether that's his family, whether that's his God, whether that's community. But it depends on what exactly he's doing and how it is being received. Because sure, I could be considered selfish because I'm spending time alone to work hard to make money for my family, but I wouldn't consider it as that.
Do you have a lot of people surprised that we have that have the feeling that we're back to a society where the man is working and providing, and the mother is taking care of the children, and we don't find it very modern and adapted to the new society.
Am I surprised, or
no? Do you have a lot of people who are surprised, and do you face this?
Yeah, so it was a model that wasn't perfect for sure, when the men would go off and work very hard whilst the women stay at home and work very hard. It definitely wasn't perfect, yet there is something about the polarity of that construct which gave people a very clear understanding of what their role was. Because now you have women that are convinced to go out and be the corporate boss and to go out and do these things, which is great if that's what they truly feel they want to do. To have a woman that is very successful and very career-driven and very career-focused, and she's a boss at work and in life, that creates dissonance within a relationship if she's married to a man who wants and does the same thing. Because you have two people that are very much single-pointed focused. It's a very masculine trait. Most clients that I work with, and this was indicative of my own marriage as well, was that once that happens, typically the polarity of the relationship begins to switch. So now the feminine partner, the woman, is taking more of the masculine role, and then the man is taking more of a, well, I won't do those things because it's taken care of. And this often comes from a shadow place where the woman is convinced that she has to go out and do everything by herself to feel safe. So therefore she's more in control of life, she's more in control of things, including her partner. And then if that is the case, she's going to attract a man that she's more powerful than. And when she does, typically that man still has issues with his mother. He likes to be mothered. He likes to be waited on. So suddenly you've created this mother-son dynamic, which nobody likes, and it creates dissonance, and then suddenly there's no intimacy in the relationship, and you resent each other. The thing about the old, models within the relationship is the man knew, okay, I need to go out and work, I need to provide, I need to protect, I need to do these things. So for centuries, thousands of years, this was his role. Whereas the partner would, create the home, should bring the energy to the space, should take care of the family, take care of the children, take care of these things. So she kind of knew that that's what she needed to do. And now since that's switched over the past 50 years or so, it has just created a lot of confusion as to what is my role and what can I do. And because there's no schooling on this, there's no okay, if your partner is making the money, then you need to take care of something else. You need to do something that she cannot do. And there are many examples where the woman makes a lot more money than the man, and so he just kind of sits back and says, okay, well, if that's done, then I don't know what else to do. So neither is perfect. This version of society has definitely created a lot more confusion, where there is a lot more, I think 50% of marriages fail and 25% of marriages stay together because of money, because of children, not because of love. So 3/4 of marriages shouldn't be together. And this is not an old statistic, this is a very new statistic. So is it of benefit that we're all confused and we don't know what we're doing? I'm not sure.
So what's a healthy balance in a couple?
The thing that really shifted, so I was married with my partner for 9 years, and we ended up breaking up 10 years ago, and kind of that was the beginning of my journey. And once I learned about polarity, I started to understand why all of my relationships had failed.
Okay.
So the briefest metaphor possible for polarity is the masculine pole is like the riverbed. So he creates the direction, the depth, the width. He's the structure. He's the container. Within the riverbed is the water, and the water is the feminine. So the water brings the energy. She could be very slow and still, or she could be rushing and raging, but she's contained within the water. If there is no riverbed, if there is no masculine structure, the water dries out. And when the water dries out, because the feminine is then trying to become her own waterbed, this is where things get flipped and switched and get ruined. It doesn't matter who takes which role, as long as your natural essence. So we've had a few words, and I don't know you that well, but I imagine and I feel that your natural essence is feminine. So you would prefer to be in a relationship where a man took the masculine role. Just as I would prefer to be in a relationship where the woman took the feminine role. For me, it used to be switched. Okay. I had this, mother wound where I was like, okay, my partner can just mother me and that's fine. Mm-hmm. So I was in a marriage for 9 years where this is the culture that I allowed to take place. Yeah. So suddenly my very feminine wife was doing all the things masculine, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'll just kick back and not do it. And it destroyed the relationship. So once I learned about polarity, I learned that, okay, I can take that role sometimes. I can take the water. But if I want to be in a relationship which is polarized and there's sexual desire and there's intimacy, I need to take the role that is more aligned with the core of who I am. And that is the masculine role. So sometimes it's fine to flip, but my natural core essence is the masculine. So I need to be the riverbed most of the time. My partner's core essence is feminine. So she needs to be the river most of the time.
Do you think your parents, if we can talk about you and your experience, your parents didn't show you the example of the man you had to be?
No. My father was not the man that I needed him to be. And we've had this conversation a few times and we've healed our relationship. And somebody said to me once, don't blame your father, you chose him. And it took me a little while to realize what that meant. And because of the relationship that we had, I now get to do what I do.
Yeah, it allowed you to grow. Okay.
It gave me the lessons that I needed to learn to do what I now do, to live my purpose. He was emotionally withdrawn. He was born 8 years after his father came home from war. So this intergenerational trauma, I don't blame him at all. And he just is, maybe for a long time he blamed his father, but likely it was his father and his father before that just passed this down the line. So, I needed him to be an example of emotional depth that I could sit and have a conversation with, that was firm, but also deeply loving. And he was just very avoidant. And it made it difficult. So I became very attached to my mum because she felt safer. Mm-hmm. So mum was, I became a mummy's boy. I was very devoted to my mother, and even after the point where I got married, that didn't change. And this was the point where I spoke earlier of the rite of passage and the initiation. This is the point where you break away from that boy-mother relationship and that dynamic. And again, you ask the question, who kind of creates these men? If a woman doesn't cut herself free from her son in a way that she's no longer mothering him, she's going to help recreate these shadow dynamics.
Oh, you're talking to me because I've got like a 9-year-old son, and I feel that at the age where...
So up to the age of 7, devote on him, nurture him, just be there for him in all of the most beautiful ways. And from 7 onwards, it's the point where you need to step back and allow him and his father to take on a stronger dynamic and a stronger role. And then from 12 to 14, you're going to see him actually start to resist you because he wants to be seen as a man. So he'll even start to do things to almost as a way to make you feel disgusted. Like he'll spit and he'll just be dirty and
my little man.
Yeah,
no.
exactly. So he'll become something to free himself from the mother-son dynamic.
Okay.
Subconsciously.
Not to be under me. Okay, not to be my little boy anymore. Okay.
He doesn't want to be a little boy. He wants to be seen as a man. So around the age of those teenage years, he'll start to do things to prove himself bigger and stronger and more manly. And this is why boys need men. And they need good men. They need men that they can look up to that are healthy and that are grounded and that are present. So they can see, oh, that's what that is. That's how I need to be. Rather than seeing somebody that goes off drinking every night and comes home and is emotionally avoidant. And
that's interesting. You mentioned the war because I notice also in Europe, like we're the grandchildren of men who went to war, who came back broken and not talking about it, or even sometimes a bit aggressive, drinking maybe, and it's because it's 2 generations after we forget about this, but I think there is still, in most of the cases, like a trauma we're carrying from these world wars.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, it's 7 generations back. We still feel the effects of intergenerational trauma, and the beautiful thing is, there hasn't been a generation like ours that has more access to healing. Everywhere you look, you can turn your phone on. There, 24 hours a day, you have access to some form of healing.
Yeah.
That's never happened before.
Okay.
So all of this trauma that has been passed down from generation to generation, we were born at a time in our family's lineage where we have access to stop that.
You mentioned you had a discussion with your dad, and I'm very interested. I'm sure, or I think, explain me that, if you making all the work and managing to put the words on what happened, did it relieve him in a way?
For sure. When you heal yourself, you heal your lineage going backwards and forwards. And that's could be a bit woo-woo for some people. But when I started to do this work, my sister's a psychologist, and I was having a conversation. I was like, my relationship with my dad's great. And she's like, meh, it wasn't.
Okay.
And when I look back on it, I realized that most of my life it wasn't. But it had just become good as an adult, so I kind of forgot about it. So I worked up the courage and was like, okay, I need to have this conversation. And I went to him, and she's like, I don't think he'll be able to handle it emotionally. I don't think he's capable enough. And he was there bathing his grandson, her son. And I kind of worked up the courage, and I went to him and said, we need to have a conversation. And he looks at me and says, I just want to be here for my grandchildren like I wasn't there for you.
Wow, okay.
And I was like, well. And we had this really deep, really beautiful conversation. And one of the, we end up hugging. I could feel the intergenerational trauma just dissolve in this moment. And one of the common excuses why children, adults don't speak to their parents and have these conversations is they won't be able to handle it. Whereas my belief and the experience of myself personally and many clients is they were waiting for me to ask or to say the thing. They don't have access, as I said, to the healing modalities that we do, so they don't have the tools required. Most parents are yearning to have that conversation, to be forgiven, to explain themselves, hey, I did my best. But when we don't have those conversations, we don't realize that they only received, or they only could give the love that they received.
Yeah.
So part of that conversation with my father was, how is your relationship with yours? And he's like, wow, it was difficult. I was born after he came home from war. He was never there. He didn't love me like I needed. And this it automatically dissolved any judgment in myself because he was just doing the best he could.
Wow. What was your healing journey? How did you do when did you first realize this? I guess it was after your marriage, probably during your marriage. What did you do to come to this point where you managed to talk to your dad and heal your dad and your ancestors?
So maybe 8 years ago, so it was about 3 years before actually it was the year before my marriage broke down. We were on holiday in Nepal, and my father, I convinced him to take mushrooms with the family. And he was very much stuck in this little box of this is how life is. This is the way life is, nothing else is aligned, or nothing else is real. Those are just drugs, they're dangerous. It was very disconnected. And we managed to convince him, and he had this experience that changed his life. And
how did you convince him? Because I'm sure a lot of women or some would try, and we don't want to give, but I mean, if it's well-intentioned, and what were the words that touched him?
It ties in a lot of what I've been speaking about. So rite of passage, you go through many throughout life. You go from boy to adolescent to man to father to elder. There's marriage in there as well. There are many rites of passages that we go through throughout life. If our parents don't do their own, or if they don't at least acknowledge the ones that we've done and they don't move over, they'll always see us as their little boys and girls. Even if you're 45 and your parents are in their 70s, they will see you as their children and not see you as the adult that you are, because they haven't moved over or they haven't done their own rite of passage. So I was 33 at the time, and my father always just saw me as a boy, and he would treat me as a boy. And so we were in Nepal. It was a family vacation. It was day 3 of a 5-day hike, and we had the entire afternoon free. And I carried these mushroom capsules with me. And he was upset that I brought them into Asia because it's dangerous, and Mum got upset. And then there was just this whole conversation around bringing drugs to Asia. And we got beyond that. And then I was talking to him about, potentially he could try it. And my sister had just come 12 months earlier to where I was living in Berlin, and she did it for the first time. And obviously had an incredible experience. And I said to her, maybe you can convince him, because she was a psychologist, so Dad almost trusted her more, even though she's 4 years younger than me. So she said to him, I think you need to try it. And we're sitting there, and set and setting was perfect. The weather was perfect. There was nobody else around. We're in the middle of nature. The Himalayas are in the background. And I had them in capsules on the picnic rug, and he just kind of picked 2 up and threw them in his mouth. Well, whoa. And he said, if I'm willing to take anything synthetic from a doctor, how bad can something natural be? Well, yes. And then 20 minutes later, it started to come on, and then it was one of the most profound experiences of my entire life. And we laughed till we cried, and this was almost 10 years ago, and we've since then taken many journeys together, and he's changed dramatically as a man. But that was the moment in life where he saw me as not just a boy, because he took his own rite of passage, and it changed our dynamic completely. So that was the first point in the healing with me and my father. Once I got into men's work, the question came, have you healed the relationship with your father? So this was another 3 years later. I was like, my relationship's great. I don't need to worry about it, because I now have a great relationship. And that's when my sister was like, yeah, but what about for the 30 odd years before that? I was like, okay. No, I've just hidden that. I forgot about it. I repressed it because I didn't want to think about it. So it was getting into men's work that kind of gave me the tools to then come to him and say, hey, we need to have a conversation. And then he was ready. he was like primed for it. And we speak about everything. We are best friends. He's like one of the greatest humans in my life. So.
Wow. That's very moving. That's a very moving story. And so it's a family thing. You have your sister helping, your dad cooperating, you making all the work. Where's your mom in all this adventure?
Mum's just doing her thing. She's so she took mushrooms properly for the first time last year. With me, my dad, and my mum sat in the backyard. I had a whole day with them. I only see them twice a year. They live back in Australia, and she really, once her sister died a few years ago, she really started to look into all of these things that myself and my sister had been into. So meditation and yoga, and they've done silent retreats together, and they've changed their diet, and they've stopped drinking alcohol, and all of these things that they've just seen us more as an inspiration rather than their children that they need to teach. And this is one of the things my dad didn't realize, that he came to me after, and he's like, I always thought that I had to teach you, where I didn't realize that you were teaching us. And so mum's great. They're together, they're doing their thing. They're very excited to be grandparents again. And
what kind of dad do you want to be? So, and I heard it's a son.
I'm having
no
a son.
pressure, no pressure for you.
So much pressure. I had a really beautiful conversation with a parent the other day who reminded me that my need to be perfect as a father will instill in my son extra pressure on him. Of like, I need to make sure that dad's okay, and I'm going to make mistakes. Like, I'm well aware of that. I'm going to do the best that I can, and I'm going to pass on some kind of trauma to my child, because that's just how it works. But if I can pass on a substantial amount less than was passed on to me, then I think I've done a pretty good job.
Are you going to do a rite of passage?
Yes.
To your child? Yeah.
I'm going to do one with my sister. Her son is 6. So at the age of 7, a child's brain forms the prefrontal cortex develops more to the point where he can then be tested and stressed out in ways of, I'll give you an example. We're in the beach and he walked down to the water. I think he was 4 at the time. I don't want to get in. And I was standing in the water. It was fine. It's like, just come in the water. No, I don't want to get in. And he was just he was very scared. And I said to my sister, just throw him in and like, I'll catch him. And she's like, no. Up to the age of 7, they need that connection. They need that attachment. They need to feel safe. From the age of 7, I'll throw him in and you can catch him. But he needs to know that he can feel safe and relied upon, and that he can trust his caregivers. So we're going to do a rite of passage for him from boy to adolescent, and then we'll do another one when he maybe 13 or 14. So it's definitely something I'm going to do with my son. Something I'm very excited about, but I got a few years left.
You have a bit of time, yeah. Enjoy the newborn first and the short nights. You were telling me before we started this interview that you were not partying anymore. Is alcohol one of the biggest enemies of men?
Alcohol was my biggest enemy. I was drinking from about the age of 15 and pretty consistently up until 33. And I considered myself a fun drunk. So I was never angry or violent. Yeah. I mean, when I was 18 or 19, I was violent, but I got into drugs when I was about 26, and the alcohol was the thing that would get me into that. So I'd want to stop the drugs, and I'd go out and I'd drink, and then I'd get drunk, and then I'd start taking drugs. And this just became a pattern. And once my marriage broke down, I went traveling, and I traveled for almost 4 years with the intention of healing and doing all of these things. And at some point, somebody asked me if I wanted to have a beer, and I'm just like, no, I don't. But previously to that, before I went traveling, everybody knew that I drank. Everybody knew that I did drugs. So it was very easy. Hey, let's have a beer. I'm like, nah, come on, let's do it. Like there was this, it was almost like I wasn't allowed to say no.
Yeah.
Because that was what I'd created.
Okay, yeah, almost your identity for the others.
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So when I went traveling, nobody knew me. So I don't want to drink. Okay, no worries. And then I got home and I'd spent quite a few months not drinking. And hey, let's go for a beer. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like, no, let's go. And it's like, no, I'm pretty good actually. And then it just became a thing where I stopped completely. And when I stopped drinking, I stopped taking drugs, and then my life magically just started to get better.
Yeah.
I lived in Berlin for many years. I loved partying, and I loved dancing, and I loved celebrating. But I also realized that I was numbing myself from feeling what needed to be felt. And I was living a very unhappy existence, so I was taking a lot of drugs, so I didn't have to feel that. And I've been around for a while. This is what most people are doing. Most people get really drunk or really high just so they don't have to feel.
Yeah.
And that's their journey.
Nic, I'm asking to all the guests this question because Harvest this year is about radical connection. And I'm asking to all the guests to share a memory, a meal where they felt very connected. I'm asking to share a meal, to recall a memory with the atmosphere, the meal, the people, but it could be a moment where you feel also radically disconnected or connected. It doesn't have to be a meal because I realize I'm French and food is important, but it doesn't need to be a meal. So do you want to share a family moment where you're with your close one and you feel or connected or disconnected? Could be also.
It's funny, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm realizing I'm painting somewhat of a negative picture of my family, but my family is incredibly beautiful and connected and together. But I needed to excavate these things within my own life and within my family life for us to get to this place. So there was a moment we're on holiday in Italy, and myself and my sister weren't drinking, but everybody else was. We were playing cards, and there was a rupture between my brother and my mum, and this escalated to the point where everybody was screaming at each other, and my parents got up and left. And this was the moment that I looked at my sister and said, now it has to happen. And they came back in and just kind of forgot, avoided having any conversation about it and pretended nothing happened. And me and my sister were like, no, let's not just look at this and reflect on what happened, but actually peel back the layers of why this happened and why this keeps happening. And we almost had like an intervention between my brother and my parents, and you stop speaking and now you speak, and now tell us how you feel and why, and no, you stop speaking. And this went on for a couple of hours and was excruciating. And my parents were crying, like, this is the worst holiday ever. And me and my sister were like, yes, this is the best holiday ever. And it really like ripped the bandage off a festering wound that needed air to breathe and to heal. And that moment started a really powerful connecting era within my family unit. And my parents will still say that was a terrible holiday, but me and my sister know that was the thing that actually shifted everything within our relationship. And my brother is just the most caring and beautiful man, and his relationship with my parents really shifted from that moment then. So yeah, that for me was the was the moment that came to mind.
Thanks a lot for sharing. And I think you didn't depict the portrait of a horrible family. On the contrary, on the opposite. And I think a lot of people would like to come to the point to what you achieved together as a family. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nic, for sharing your story. And thanks for watching Harvest Series podcast.